So Pankaj, in our respective journeys with Bṛhat, Itihas, Dharm, one of the things that we've had to unlearn or confront is this idea that we have always been a very peaceful civilization, a very non-conquering civilization. There are things said that we never attacked any other country, we never conquered any other people. So let us begin with how true is this? Unpacking this statement, what do you feel about it?
First of all, that's actually factually wrong. If you see, we have made conquests from Tamil Nadu, from Odisha, in Southeast Asia. Many conquests over that. Otherwise, we would not be able to explain how Bali became Hindu, how Cambodia had the largest Hindu temple in the world, which is Angkor Wat, is still the largest Hindu temple, not functioning anymore as a Hindu temple, but the largest. One of the oldest Hindu temples on the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites is not in India, it's actually in Vietnam. What used to be Champa and Annam. So if there were Hindus there, which was not the traditional part of Bharat worship, it certainly meant that we went there and we expanded Dharmic circle. Even what we consider as India right now, even within that, there are real examples of people going out. We start from what is called as Sapta Sindhu area. That is the core of where the Saraswati River used to be, which was one of our oldest cultural centers, civilization centers. Then we are in the Ganga Yamuna Dwar. And after that, we expand even within what is now Bharatvarsha and take the idea, the central idea of Sanatan Dharma and the concept of a nation from a cultural point of view. So this is first we did it within India and then we took it outside India's boundaries. So that's certainly not true. It is actually a fault after medieval invasions, when Indian civilization gets battered by an alien civilization for a long time, then we stop going out and then the myth gets created that we do not attack others. It is actually a fault which when modern internet Hindu Renaissance began, we started hearing that we are the only country in the world which hasn't attacked any other country in the past 1000 years. So we are touting your fault at that time as a virtue, which we should not do. Technically it's wrong and it happened a lot in our history. We also went there. Of course we had a code. Of course we were different than others. Of course there were no genocides involved. But like soldiers we fought and won territories and expanded our idea.
So that is then the counter also that comes that, okay, if we also did expand, if we also did conquer various places, and you asked this question, how did Hinduism spread to Southeast Asia, for example? So then the counter that often comes is that, okay, so then does it mean that we were no different? That this was a version of Dharmic colonialism and what we perpetuated on Southeast Asia was similar to what was perpetuated on us? So can they be compared? Is there a difference between them? And if we can even touch upon, they say that how we look at, let's say, the Timurid invaders, perhaps that is how people of Indonesia might look at, the Chola Rajas. So where do you balance these things out?
It is actually very different. We did expand the circle of our civilization, culture and religion also, but that was not a colonial expansion. Because, and you can see it in history and in our books, in the instructions that we give in our Shastras, that the populations do not have to be touched in the sense that the women and the children and the civic society should not be disturbed. Their religion should never be disturbed. So wherever we went and conquered, we always honored their deities. And it was not like we foisted our culture completely on them and disregarding their culture and their food, their habits in total. So that didn't happen. We went there, we fought like soldiers. Of course, the war happened between soldiers and two armies, like it always happens, like two armies fight. There is, of course, vicious fight, people kill each other. That's how victory is made, victory is claimed. So that happened, but it was always very different. But even more than that, there was another kind of expansion which was involved in the expansion of the circle of Sanatan Dharma. That was expansion led by our Jnanis, our saints and sadhus. They would go to a new place, which is not exactly Vedic or not deeply connected to the Vedic Sanskrit center. They would start living there, start meditating there, create ashram, and through that, by spreading knowledge, by spreading tapas, by the sheer power of their tapas, and by interacting with the communities there, they would actually expand the idea, the Vedic Sanskrit idea. In the communities which we now classify as tribal communities, which live in forest areas and others. So this is a constant instruction in our Shastras, in our history, that these communities have to be influenced by the Vedic Sanskrit, inspired by the Vedic Sanskrit idea of our culture and civilization through the Jnanis and saints who are roaming mendicants all over the country. Living examples of embodiment of our culture in Sanatana Dharma. There is a very beautiful phrase where the great Gandhian scholar Banwariji says that it was not the Aranya in which the Aranyaks were written. It was the Aranyak, the act of writing Aranyak, which created the Aranya. Because the word Aranya means that where no violence takes place. A great Jnani comes and starts doing tapas and creates an ashram. He gives abhaya to all the living creatures there, flora and fauna, and the communities, that now on there should be no mindless fighting, no mindless killing of each other. And in that area, the central idea, the central Vedic idea then takes root, and this is how we expand the circle of Sanatana Dharma. How is it different? How is even this different from the colonial idea? Because first of all, it is done by taking an internal journey. Your outer world, this samsara is changed by a jnani who is going on an internal journey. Second, there is no disrespect of the local natural religion and deities. For example, there are various examples like that. This is how we increased even within what you consider as India even now, legally even India now, even within those boundaries. There are various examples to that that you can take even from recent history. For example, there is a case of Upper Assam, where Sriman Sankardev went in 16th, 17th century, and he started Namghar. He didn't even have the benefit of great vigrahas, stone vigrahas, and great architecture and sculpture, because in those areas, even if you go, they are extremely forested, very remote, great bounty of nature, but not much stone that you will find to build great architecture, great monumental architecture. So what he did, built these Namghar, which were simply places where you go and do Sankirtan in the name of Lord Krishna. It was a Vaishnava Sampradaya, so you sing to the glory of Lord Krishna all time. In many of these places, actually the Sankirtan goes on 24/7. In many of these places, it has never stopped for the past 350-400 years. So such great tapas by taking the name of Lord Krishna without even the benefit of great architecture, great sculpture. So this is how he expanded the idea. And while we know the condition of Assam, Lower Assam, Western Assam is completely overtaken by Bangladeshi influx. On the other hand, Upper Assam is almost pristinely Hindu because of the impact of great sampradaya of Sriman Sankardev. Similarly, when you take the case of Meitei Hindus of Manipur, if you see the map of Northeast India, the situation has become very bad. Even in Arunachal now, they claim the last census was in 2011. And in 2011, around 35 to 36% had become Arunachal had become Christian. The Christian organizations and also the Hindu organizations confirm that the percentage of Christians in Arunachal has moved past 50%. It has become around 55. So if you consider all of Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur and Mizoram, there is almost a continuous belt of Christian border in northeast. Only the valley of Manipur is Hindu because the Meitei tribe lives in the valley and Meiteis are Vaishnava, great Vaishnava. Now these Meiteis, they were, our saints went until early 19th century. 17th, 18th and until times as recent as early 19th century, the Goswamis from Bengal, Bihar and even Uttar Pradesh, they would go and repeatedly initiate them in sadhanas which are central to the Vaishnava Dharma. That you have to take this name in a certain way. You have to do this archana, this puja 3 times a day, 5 times a day, 7 times a day. In this particular way, in this particular custom and ritual, you have to wear particular clothes and do this and that. So that was happening. This, if I were to use the word, cultural proselytization, which is not forced on anyone, but this by making your culture aspirational, by showing them how it is better. And this is how it expanded. Our saints were single-handedly going to remotest part of Bharatvarsha and re-infusing them with Sanatana. This does not mean that before 17th century Meiteis were not Hindus. But we touch them again and again because it is quite probable that the Manipur that is today is the Manipur of Mahabharata. But even if it is the case that this Manipur is not the Manipur of Mahabharata, because certain scholars maintain that the Manipur of Mahabharata is in what is now Odisha, and it is quite possible. But even then, the idea that we recreate the sacred areas of Bharatvarsha again and again and again, because that's why there is Kanchipuram, which is based on Kashi, the Kashi of the south. That's how Madurai, which is based on Mathura, which is supposed to be the Mathura of south. This is how there is an Ayodhya in Thailand. And all of these people believed that they had no difficulty in keeping 2 or 3 Ayodhyas in their minds at the same time and believing all at the same time that this is the Ayodhya. So this is how we influenced and expanded. We of course expanded from a certain core and to a greater area and expanded the circle of our civilization. And that is Dharmic expansionism. And that is very different from colonial expansionism. That's where we can claim that this is the Hindu exceptionalism, that we do expand, we should expand for the benefit of us and the world, but that is not at the cost of others, because we respect other deities. In Meitei Hindus, they all are worshippers of Sanamahi. Sanamahi is a deity of their Meitei local deity, and the shrine to Sanamahi is to be found in every Meitei home. But at the same time, they also some worship Vishnu, some worship Shiva, some worship Shakti, and of course all of them. So they are Hindu, but then they do not abandon the gods that were there, always that were there. This was the divide in our civilization, which was not divide, but complementary to each other. The desiya and margiya. Desi is whatever exists locally, including the gods and deities. So the food that is local, the clothes that are local, the local dialects, local customs and mores. And then there is a Sanskrit Vedic culture, which is the marga, the highway, so to say. So these two have to be complementary. They were always complementary to each other. The marg didn't try to kill Des. The Des didn't try to go completely independent so that it would become cessationist. Actually, that is why the pagan religions world over, who did not have the benefit of Sanatan Dharma and Sanatan civilization, they were picked one by one by one or the other prophetic monotheistic religion. Because India was under the aegis of Vedic Sanatan Dharma. That's why it was not being taken over. So we were different, but we sure expanded. Just because we are different doesn't mean that we do not expand. That is impossible, and the history doesn't agree to it.
And it's good to talk about history on this. So especially because when right now you mentioned, for example, Bangladeshi immigrants, or you may mention other population groups, and immediately people might think, okay, this is communalism at show. That this is, you are drawing boundaries between us and them. But it's important to understand on what basis are these boundaries drawn. Because as we expand, as we assimilate more people amongst us, it's these boundaries. And you and I have previously discussed how we have thought of civilization as the shared fire. So it is the shared yagna that we are all in. And everyone who can come and share in this yagna, who will never, no doubt, get benefit from it as well. So everything that emerges from the yagna will be shared amongst all of us who have come here at the fire. And essentially, that has been our expansionism, where it is the civilizational fire. And that is the mark that you are also referring to. That is what is expanded. And time again, we've seen that the boundaries are drawn essentially not even by us. They are drawn by those people who, through their own agency and will, choose not to participate in such a civilizational fire, and even more problematically, try to come and extinguish it. So this is where we find, even in the classic story of the Ramayana, for example, to young Ram and Lakshman, Vishwamitra comes and he takes them for help when he is doing exactly what you're mentioning, which is the Aranya creation, so to speak. And then there are these Asur figures who are the ones who are refusing to play. They're refusing to come and share with this fire, which all can participate in. And that is what makes them the Asur. That is what makes them the Rakshas.
Yeah.
So again, it is they who by their actions are saying that, well, this is the boundary line between us. And we find this example occurring in history, Indian history, Puranic history, again and again. In fact, there is even a strange resonance to it. Because if we look at Puranic genealogy, and one of the earliest tribes that come are the Purus. It is from them later that the Bṛhats come of the Rig Veda, and from them later that the Kauravas and the Pandavas come of the Mahabharata. So a very prominent dynasty which begins with the Purus. Now the word Puru itself actually comes from the dhatu pu, which means to purify. Pujna, that is the word puja in our language as well. And lo and behold, they are called those who purified. That is what Puru literally means. It is also related to the word Purohit, the one who leads from the front. So the people who, and it is these people who we know names like Yayati, Nahush, who were just ancestral to the Purus. And we see that they are the ones who come and begin to settle the Saraswati greater region early on. So the Brahmavart area, the Saptasindhu area that you're referring to, where the fire was first kindled.
Yes.
It happens under the Purus, and the name is also referring to that. So that resonance in how our history is described to us, we find that record again and again. Long before them, of course, we know of the Samudra Manthan.
Yes.
Where also it was a case of coming together after eons of battles. There are so many, more than 14 battles between the Daityas, Adityas. The Samudra Manthan itself is one of those battles. But again, there is Shukracharya on one side, there is Brihaspati on the other side, and there is an attempt to share resources. It breaks down when that contract of shared resources is broken. Again, we find example of Ven, who is the father of Prithu Venya. So whenever there is any king, any ruler who in history is called a bad king, a bad ruler, he does all those things which you described are part of traditional conquest that the modern world has known and seen, where you snatch a people's destiny away from their hands. You ban them from following their own traditions, their own beliefs. That is what Hiranyakashipu also did when he tried to prevent his own son from his chosen worship. And we know what happened there. That is what Ven also does. And in his case, the people rebel against him because he bans the study of Veds, he bans the studies of wisdom, and he says only I must be worshipped. And then it is from the people's collaboration with the rishis that Prithu, the great Chakravartin, the first Chakravartin, he arises. And again in Prithu's time, of course, there's that great story of Prithu chasing the earth in the form of a cow to all corners and then forcing her to yield herself, which is where she gets the name Prithvi. And a lot more things emerge from that great act of Prithu. And the Devs are said to extract Ojas or Ojaskar from it. The Asurs come, they extract something else from it. Manushya, so all those tribes of ancient India are mentioned as participants and beneficiaries in that first fire that Prithu put up. The Samudra Manthan we've discussed. We see that happening in the Rig Veda, of course, where all these themes play out much more starkly, where Agni anyway is the central totem. We also see the opposites. We also see where hard boundaries have to be drawn. So there's a great story of Sagar, who was the Ikshvaku king. He's an ancestor to Sri Ram. And he, in his early time, actually the people of Ayodhya are displaced. So he's born in an ashram to a rishi. And grows up not knowing his own ancestry and his own lineage. And as he grows old, the people of Ayodhya who are displaced and scattered, and they've all been displaced by the Hehaya tribe, one particular tribe, which at that time is troubling pretty much the entire population of the Indo-Gangetic plains. So they throw all the other dynasties into disarray. And we find names, prominent names in them like Kartavirya, Arjun. So the Hehayas are patently not playing with the civilizational fire. They in fact will burn rishi ashrams itself. They will burn entire forests itself. There were rules for conquest because it was understood that the desire for power, the desire for territory, the desire for sovereignty is a fair desire in the physical world. This was understood, and the culture had built systems for it, which is of course Kshatriya Dharma, Raj Dharma. But the Hehayas would flout it all. So if they attacked a city, they would burn the city itself. They would not spare innocents also. So this is clearly a person with whom you would have to draw a boundary. So when we talk of Dharmic expansionism, fire, its natural tendency is anyway to expand. And this is how we find in the ancient times as well, all the tribes, it is very possible that, when we see in the genealogy tree, they're all shown to come from the same source. Kashyap, for example, is the progenitor from which all the Daityas, Aditya tribes come. later then, Vivaswan and then his son Vivasut Manu, from Manu, the great progenitor. It's very possible that perhaps this was retroactively done when these tribes did become one.
Yeah.
And that is why actually it doesn't matter whether it was retroactively done or it is true or not.
Yeah.
Because it anyway displays what the civilization's imperative was. The civilization's imperative was to draw unities,
Yes.
was to draw commonalities.
Yes.
So in the modern world, which was divided half on the basis of racism, of these boundaries across which then colonialism found its place. Here we have an example of the inverse. Despite all the ethnic differences they might have known and seen, they are saying we are from the same father, we are from the same mothers.
Yes.
So that theme plays out again and again in ancient history, and with the Hehayas, then when Sagar Ekshwaku goes against them, there is no mercy to the Hehayas. So all the Raj Dharm that he does show against his other rivals, where the other rivals go to his guru Vasisht and plead for mercy. So his guru tells Sagar that just exile the royal members of those tribes, which is what he does. But with the Hehayas, no such rules are in place. They themselves have violated the rishis, so they can't turn to any rishi for help or mercy. And it is described that their cities are razed to the ground. They are utterly destroyed, conquered, eliminated. And of course, that task is fully completed then by Parshuram, who comes a few generations after Sagar in this kind of counting. And he's said to have destroyed the Kshatriyas 21 times over, which is essentially the Hehayas. Their line comes to a complete end. So we have this example over and over again of this template for how expansion did happen. It was essentially this civilizational fire expanding with each and every one who was willing to sit down, be civilized, and come and share the common spoils and the common bounty that can be created. So does this then give us a template for a kind of world assimilation? Are we then talking about a Dharmic expansionism where everyone has to follow or can follow Sanatan Dharma? What would that look like, and what kind of templates can we draw going forward? So then now when we look at the past template, when we see how this fire has spread in the past, what does it look like for our global aspirations as they're emerging of one world, one government, one planet, one species? And there is maybe one paradigm currently under which we are globalizing into this one unit. But then we see that, Dharmic expansionism can be an alternate, it's a different template. So how would that look going forward? And I mean, I think we can imagine some concerns, let us say, of the other side, that does this mean some kind of, religious subversion of people across the planet? Even closer home, even the idea of a Hindu Rashtra seems to trouble people. So there are fears that they have in their mind. Yet what we are talking about is quite contrary to that. I mean, that is the idea of Hindu Rashtra that they fear is not even the Hindu Rashtra that we might be asking for. So what would this look like, a global Dharmic expansionism in the modern climate?
Actually, it is the exact opposite of the one world, one government, one species. This template is actually the template of letting every community, every region have its own laws, customs, modes, food, language, values. But having the Sanatan Hindu umbrella, because that is the only culture in the entire world which develops in a way which doesn't oppress and suppress local and regional cultures. So you can see it as the exception which becomes the rule. In a way that Sanatan rules the world not militarily, not through the agency of armies or forced expansion of ideas, but in a sense where it makes sure that no such ideology, like monotheistic ideology, rises, which kills the agency of other cultures and civilizations, which are under its aegis. And because it's a connected world now, we can no longer afford to be in silos. We need that global connect, because the world is connected, the globe is connected already. We cannot behave as if it is not. We cannot go back to the era where it is not. That is why it needs a Sanatan umbrella. That's the idea that Sri Ram Sarupji gives. So he says that the pagan religions of the world have to the first step is the pagan non-monotheistic sects of the world, religions of the world, have to come together. And the umbrella has to be Sanatan, because it's the largest and the greatest functioning pagan polytheistic natural dharma, natural religion, so to say, which is still functioning. It has its texts alive, it has its institutions alive, it has its customs and modes which are still functioning. So it is able to incorporate that experience of functioning and also the experience of facing the other, facing the enemies of Sanatan Dharma and natural religions and surviving that. So it can guide the world religions and it can create a protective umbrella. You can imagine that as a sort of protected forest where nothing is intervened in.
Yes.
The state which protects, the agency which protects, doesn't intervene in what goes on in that particular piece of land. It intervenes only when a hostile element tries to enter and destroy the agency and the independence of that particular area. So the world, entire world outside Bharatvarsh is that protected area where Sanatan forces intervene only when an idea like monotheism tries to overtake and destroy them. Does this mean, because the question certainly arises, does this mean the boundaries of Bharatvarsh then become the boundaries of the entire world is Bharatvarsh? No, I don't think so. First of all, the world is too diverse. Our geography makes us too diverse. And beyond a certain point, when food, culture, clothes become completely different, languages become so completely different, it doesn't make sense to put them in one nation or in one culture or one country. So the idea, the boundaries of Bharatvarsh ideally should remain the same which are described in our Shastras. From Himalayas to Kanyakumari, from the points where somewhere in Pakistan, what is now Pakistan now, to somewhere around Assam and Bengal, the boundaries that we currently have. So that is the core idea of Bharatvarsh. And we can argue for the global case for Sanatan Dharma and at the same time having a sacred core, sacred center, which is this land. So that is the idea of the Sanatan case for the world. Sanatan Dharma gives you the abhay that you can be what you want to be with Sanatan overseeing so that no rogue power overtakes. Now, what you said about Parshurama, and what you said, you gave the historical account of how we conquered the Hayas. There is another idea ensconced there in which you can illustrate the difference, the way in which we are different than the civilization, than other civilizations, even other pagan civilizations like China. Because there is only, I always maintain that civilization comparisons of India can be made with only one country in one civilization, which is China, because no other civilization ever had that skill. Not that they were not great. They were great, of course. Spiritually very great also, before Christianity overtook a lot of these world cultures and religions. But in scale, only China is comparable. But even so, we can make a comparison with China. We had Chaturvarna. Varnashram Dharma is that we have 4 Varnas: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudras. China also has Varna system, but it does not have 4 Varnas. It has 3 Varnas, which are Vaishya, Kshatriya and Shudras and the masses. They, of course, their names are different. The meanings of their names are not exactly this, they are different, but this is how they also organize their society. But they do not have the Brahmin Varna. So, Brahmin as a Varna is a unique contribution of Sanatan civilization, in which they have done a wonderful thing. What have they done is that they have constituted an entire class within the boundaries of samsara, which has no stake in that samsara, and yet it holds all the rights to create the Sanatan rules about that society, which is a wonderful position. If you see, you cannot be more objective than that. That those who are making the rules have no personal stake in it at all. Now, this is a theory. Many would argue that this is not how it happened historically, and there must be deviations from it. There must be some individuals who might have usurped some power for themselves. Some situations in which it was different, that's okay. But when we are blamed on the basis of our text, we should also be celebrated and on the basis of our text. So this is what the theory is. And this Trivarna system of China and Chaturvarna system of India, that is what makes all the difference in the historical experience of these two civilizations. China always had completely totalitarian, brutal dictators. The first emperor itself is very whimsical and extremely brutal, very cruel for the masses. India, of course, there is no country where no cruelty takes place between the powerful and the powerless and those who have less power. So I'm not saying India was completely sanitized with all the violence, from the violence, but we do not have either imagination in the text or in history, Hindu kings who are like the first emperor of China.
Yeah.
And whenever they try to do something, so you can see the signs, you know that history better. There are a lot of signs when such totalitarian tendencies come up in some kings. Suddenly we see that the societies, the three other varnas rise up and clamp down their authority, and these kings, these tendencies are controlled, those individuals are controlled. A lot of times it is the Brahmins who then overtake the Kshatriya prerogative here. Because when the king doesn't agree to the divine authority, and it's a great discussion in our civilization, that राजा का दंड तो सब मानेंगे, प्रजा मानेगी, परंतु राजा किसका दंड मानेगा? The idea of Sengol is that राजा धर्म का दंड मानेगा, so that the king will listen to the authority of dharma, which is signified very concretely in Sengol. So that is the symbol of entire Dharmic authority. And when he violates that, then the Brahmin Varna and many from them actually take over, but only as an emergency. They don't keep power. They take power for a brief period of time, write all the things, bring the society back to its normal, and then they once again go into their own roles. So this is what happened in Parshurama. But Parshurama, I would not even want to see as a Brahmin, because he is a sannyasi. So he is outside. He was of course born as a Brahmin, but he was outside the fold of Chaturvarna, also because he was an avatara and outside these rules in many ways. And that is where we bring in another nuanced point here, because even if the Chaturvarna system falls down or stops functioning due to some reason, then the Jnanis and the Jivan Mukts, who are outside the boundaries of the four Varna and the society that we have created, then they re-inject the authority of Dharma in the society. So we have these emergencies, cases of emergency, when all order breaks down, then the Jnanis, the sannyasis, the self-enlightened beings who then descend from the jungles, from their caves, in mountains, and they reinstitute authority. That is the case, and that is something so wonderful that no other civilization can compare to that in these examples.
Absolutely. And what it brings to mind is that in the modern world we have the idea of checks and balances.
Yes.
And that's the great balancer for democracy. And which democracy, of course, Winston Churchill famously said that it's the worst system there is except for all the others. So it is the best current working system. And we can essentially say that the modern global expansionism that we are on, it is riding on the wave of democracy and its allied institutions or ideologies, capitalism, free enterprise, etc. So what comes to my mind is works of people like Michael Shermer or Steven Pinker. Michael Shermer wrote the book The Moral Arc, and Steven Pinker in Enlightenment Now. And they further the idea that no two democratic nations have ever gone to war. And they use this to, of course, prop up democracy as this great
universal.
Yes, and it is a peace spreading arc of humanity. That as long and as far as democracy spreads, there will be peace, trade, McDonald's, Starbucks, and no wars. That's the idea. And to my mind, the idea of Dharmic expansionism, with all these kinds of checks and balances that you also mentioned, is an alternative to this trajectory, which perhaps the only alternative. What is also important to keep in mind is that it is the only system that actually has thought and accord for non-human entities as well. So the very idea of other animals, how they are treated. And we are not their shepherd, they are not our pawns, but equal participants in this global enterprise. The idea of natural resources, rivers, mountains, they of course get personified and deified in not just Sanatan Dharma of India, but of course pagan cultures worldwide. But that umbrella comes over here. So anyway, when we want to move towards one world, one planet, it will not be a planet that is separated from its ecosystem. The only way for us to reach there is in harmony and balance with our ecosystem, for which again it is the Dharmic solution, the Dharmic paradigm, that at least speaks some to that degree. So, and what also comes to my mind, Sri Aurobindo's Uttarpara speech, where he famously talked about Bṛhat and Sanatan Dharma. And he said that as long as Sanatan Dharma exists, Bharat would exist, it would have an identity. But if there is no Sanatan Dharma, then there is no Bharat as well.
Yeah.
And you, of course, mentioned about how there is a geographical boundary within which we can think of the nation of Bharat.
Yeah.
But beyond that, in the sense of metaphor, in the sense of one world, one government, everywhere where that Agni spreads, everywhere where the planet comes to the same yagna together, would be the land of Dharma and would be Bharat in that sense.
Yeah.
So Sri Aurobindo's words hold true not just for Bharat, the nation, but actually for Prithvi, the planet.
Yeah.
And here, then we move into the territory of Dharmic exceptionalism, of why it is that we are turning to this as a source for so many things, and why it is that we want this to be the fire that spreads amongst humanity. Because then the skeptic may ask, well, everyone wants their respective fires to spread.
Yes.
So what is different about this fire? And finding how this fire has spread itself, first of all, not by burning others, but actually by enlightening others. It is a civilization of light. Then it is a fire that has had space for non-human entities, a far greater degree of respect to our embeddedness, to all the great words we use today, systems thinking, holistic frameworks,
Deep history, deep thinking.
deep time, all of those are embedded within this one philosophy. And that, I think, is the reason why we find common ground on these matters of Dharmic exceptionalism, Hindu expansionism.
Yeah, and before the globe was connected, actually, it was possible 300, 400, 500 years ago to make a case only for Sanatan Dharma, then we can let the rest of the world be, even if it's evil, even if it's bad.
Right.
But now, after the whole world is connected, and there are millennial ideologies like Christianity and Islam and communism, who have their stated goal as conquering the complete world down to the last man for their ideology, to their sect, we cannot allow the world to just remain it like it is without the Sanatan umbrella. Because what happened in Africa and Americas and all over the world, wherever Christianity and Islam went, the desi cultures there, the local cultures, they had no protective margiya umbrella like Sanatan Dharma and Hindu Dharma. And so when a militant idea came, which wanted to destroy their cultures, their gods, their deities, their ways of worship, eating, thinking, they were not able to resist it because, of course, the force was too overwhelming. It was a global force, and they were just a small tribe of perhaps sometimes even 5,000 or 7,000 people. It was just simply not possible for them to throw up a response. But when they have the Sanatan umbrella, they are completely free to be what they are. But when such a militant idea comes, they should be able to tap into an authority and take guidance from a central culture like Hindu Dharma, how to throw response to an ideology like Christianity. So this is why this is the Sanatan case for the world. We cannot leave them, the world alone. We have to culturally conquer the entire world so that it remains what it was.
How it is, absolutely.